Chyba możemy zacząć.
I think we could kick off. We have all the panelists on site. Let me welcome you to the panel, or rather a round table, on the topic that is on the edge of new technologies, international affairs, but also all the matters regarding us now and here and in Poland and EU. We will discuss whether are the technologies driving us into a Cold War. Our panelists today shall be a great set of excellent analysts and experts. You can not only listen to them today, but also read on various media. We have no political stars with us, but they are stars of knowledge. What is happening? Alicja Bachulska, China analyst in MapInfluenCE project and a member of China observers in Central and Eastern Europe. We have Patrycja Pendrakowska, chairman of the board of the Boym Institute, Jakubowski, chief specialist in the China program and coordinator of the project Economic Links in Eurasia, and Michał Rekowski, program director of the CYBERSEC European Cyber Security Forum. I am Sylwia Czubkowska. I am a Spiders Web Plus leading editor, and we are the organizer and the patron of this round table. As this is a tech magazine, we should talk about highly technological topic, but I believe we will quickly move to a broader and closer topic. And I would like to begin with the main question. Are technologies driving us into a Cold War? What is the Cold War? Can we speak of it today? So, as we sit one by one, thank you. I would begin from outlining a broader context we seldom hear of in Poland from the perspective of an observer of the Polish media and narration of what is happening in China, Chinese-American competition. We may seem that the technical competition is something that came to the discussion out of the blue, nobody expected. Obviously, for a good observer, this is the outcome of a process that has been on for many years, if not decades, and it is partially a result of the West. EU, the US, cooperated with China on the basis of the involvement policy. So, assuming that the economic cooperation with China and China's opening to the economic world will bring economic liberalizations with a touch of protectional assumption that authoritarian states are unable to build their own innovations, new technologies that would be cutting-edge technologies. For many years, it seems that China would be partially cooperating with Western entities in a more or less open way, import and adopt technologies, but they will never build new added value. They will never become a systemic threat. In the recent years, it somehow turned out it's to the contrary, and for the first time in history, China not only adopts standards, tech specs, but also it imposes some, or it is the leader in developing certain technologies, or even of strategic application. That shows that thinking about cooperation with China was purely wishful and was based on a now naive assumption, but realistic at those time, the end of history that many now criticize or laugh at, and which led to 2021, when we speak of new technologies that drive us into new Cold War. Though I believe this comparison maybe is not incorrect, but it makes us think in historic analogies that assume we have two blocks unrelated to each other, which do not have similar economic power of influence that can win in 0-1 conditions, but the situation is far more complex, and I don't believe that using this comparison is justified now. Good afternoon. Thanks for the question and for the invitation. I will continue Alicja's words from a different perspective. I'd say that I would reverse the positions, reposition the questions. In my opinion, we have deep international changes today, which starting from a global economy point where the technology growth was the common global domain. If you look how knowledge is developed in each economy sector, those are very complex production chains, very complex R&D centers relations throughout the world, where the developed world is included, with China for a long time present there. The starting point was that the technological complications are so difficult. Everybody is so codependent that there is no competition. But there have always been competitions to be political competitions, like jet engine Ws. You can drive passenger planes, but also jet fighters. Everybody looked for that. Everybody wanted to have their own. What we see new as the international situation densifies, which results what China and Russia are doing. They are detaching somehow from the world of concordance. Technologies are one of the most important factors of power and influence. We are not talking about military and security issues, but also digital technologies. Depending on who collects and processes our data, that they will impact democracies, consumers' existence. You all know it very well. The point is that the telecom domain, internet, that was a novum for quite a long time, then that was technical issue, and today is in the very center of attention. Today, the global political competition takes place mainly on the technological level, but perhaps it will stay there. Perhaps we are entangled so much you cannot straighten that. The China, US, Japan, the EU wants to use technology to guarantee security and attack the others. Well, thank you very much for your comments. So to the point, I agree with, but from our perspective, the competition, technological competition, was until World War II omnipresent between the USSR and the Western world. So I wouldn't claim this is something totally new. The danger is in that the internet, which we carry on ourselves in our smartphones, impacts our daily lives so much. It can collect so much data, and that is something new. Previously, these were technologies, as Jakub mentioned, related to arms. These are things at home. So it will matter if we enter smart homes with cameras. We can measure everything. We will have a smart house. And that will be a great field to collect data. A good example comes from regulation in China that the Tesla cars mustn't park in the vicinity of official buildings related to the military or public institution, because Tesla has its business model, that it is not just a vehicle, but a machine that collects data from its environment. So a car that 20 or 30 years ago was never thought to be such a tool, today that vehicle can be a spy tool. So I would say that the tension is more uncored in our daily lives. We, as citizens, are the target for corporations, tech corps, and internet technology companies. And finally, I believe that thinking in the new Cold War category is like cognitive prosthesis, because we've got quite a different political situation, international political situation. We have huge investments by American corporations in China, Chinese in Europe and the US. We have quite a remarkable exchange of young elites. Children of party politicians graduate from top universities in the US. So this is totally different than USSR versus the Western world in the previous decades. That is why that sounds well as a good slogan, but it carries a lot of misunderstanding. So it's not a good slogan. It's a cognitive prosthesis, and that's how you should perceive. I'm also happy to be with you. Good afternoon. Let me go from Patrycja Pendrakowska's words. I do agree that the concept of the Cold War for today's situation is hardly useful in terms of analytics, but we can speak of something like emergence of geopolicy of new digital technologies. This is something new, and only now do we realize it. Will digital technologies lead us to a Cold War? Yes and no, depend how you see that. In terms of American-Chinese competition, you cannot cut off the tech area that becomes the central field from geopolitical competition of these two states, where the awareness of conflict was before we realized it would be in digital technologies. So that is an element of that conflict. And then what we are observing are digital technologies becoming the field of conflict. And that results, well, to build a broader context of global trends. Firstly, we have seen for the 20 years more aggressive and offensive actions in the cyberspace. The key entities to run those are the states, and it is quite obvious that in case of American-Chinese conflict in cyberspace, it all started from the Chinese cyber espionage operations that resulted in stealing the F-35 jet fighter plans. Then the conflict went more radical. It was not only limited to these two states. We had also increasing activity of Iran and North Korea as cyber aggressors. Even broader context is that although we all know the internet was created as innovation created by the US Defense Agency, then for the past 20 years, the global universal internet as we know and the key digital technologies we use have been developed by the private sector. That impacted the nature of the global internet, that they are universal, democratic. Whoever holds a good device with network connection could access the global resources of information. In that period, the digital technology started to fundamentally penetrate us as citizen, individual people, but also economies, societies, and the state system, and they became a key element of what we today name the state's critical infrastructure or providers of critical services. And that evoked reaction from the states because it essentially undermined the sovereignty in digital era. Some states woke up with the awareness of that they aren't controlling the exchange of information on the internet, but they are not controlling the infrastructure by which state security sectors communicate. And what is happening in states is a global trend. It started several years ago, and it's been going on everywhere in the space, in the world. Because of that, the EU is building European digital sovereignty to tame the technological revolution so that it respects our personal freedom rights, human rights, democratic rights. Because of that, in China in 2015, during the opening of the Internet Forum in Wuhan, the President Xi spoke about the cyber sovereignty of China. That trend is present worldwide, and this is an important context where we have the state apparatus to wishing to regain some sovereignty, and on the other hand we have global tech corporations whose agenda is often global, so it's difficult to understand from the point of view of a state where the company is located and that have to run global businesses considering consumers in every market in the world, not only domestic markets.
If you agree that Cold War is prosthetics, a simplification, simple explanation of what has been happening around us, how should we tackle the situation we are facing at the moment? Not only the USA and China, it's each and every one of us, because we are decision makers. The decisions associated with technologies. I know where the notion of Cold War it's taken from columnist language, because we observe similar mechanisms from the Cold War period, or even a return of specific powers. The Five Eyes Alliance has got common interest, cooperation between USA, Canada, New Zealand and the United Kingdom. COCOM of the 50s that stops the influx of new technologies into Eastern Bloc may be a new format, a blacklist prepared by Donald Trump's administration. This may have a negative impact on China-based and China-cooperating companies. So what's going on at the moment? If this is not a Cold War, what it is? Maybe little Cold Wars between markets, and big techs are entangled. China's big techs are entangled. What are we doing now? What is that? This is a very good question. My perception is as follows. At least two planes for the processes to happen. On the one hand, a global platform all over the world, European Union, China, US, Global South, to a lesser scale, because the development scale is smaller. We realize that both the state and citizens need to take a step back to understand the implications of today's fast technological development, both for the statehood and institutions, how they operate, how they should operate, what they should offer to citizens. And we've got the social level, how people use new technologies, what are the threats associated with new technologies. And I'd like to show how it's been developed in China, looking at the recent decisions of the Beijing's are observed. How is this perceived in some parts of Europe? This is a positive example. China is a decision-making entity. They can make a decision, and these are the steps that we should inspire. This should be the real power that impacts the operation of companies. This argumentation ignores realities, where the government, on the one hand side, introduces the regulations because they respond to problems of the society, business sector, how technological companies have been developing in a legislative void, how it resulted in different pathologies, monopolies of different companies. But is it swift enough? Because this is, well, single-party governments. The logics of control is different. So some problems are solved. We have the attempt to solve the problems. But Communist Party of China has got the bigger control of what is happening and how they can develop their narrative, how they take care of well-being, transparency of new institutions. Are these the inspirations that we should follow? Should we have a positive perception, or should we be skeptical? Let me return to the question, trying to realize where we are. Cold War? I wouldn't say no to that. We shouldn't use a Cold War to countries that clash with one another. We have a conflict of two countries. The armaments is what defines setting up the political ideological dispute either way. This is not what we are having at the moment. We are in a different moment. We don't have two poles. This is the wrong line of thinking. We shouldn't be thinking this way. It's not China versus United States. This is multi-power points in this technological war. Technology is the main battlefield, conflict field between the big players. So tell me, what kind of technologies are we speaking about? So I'll tell you how it works. We entered kind of 10 years ago into checking stage, what state can do, what kind of weapons they have. They started to try and test who is the technology producer, where is the data, who's got big tech impact. We can injure somebody else, like Huawei. Telecom was technical, and Americans thought Chinese will build 5G network and they will have impact on other countries. So let me explain. Up to 5G frequencies, it was the Western countries that held the leadership baton in all broadly defined telecom and internet. And all of a sudden, China was faster to prepare 5G technologies. For the first time in decade, they took us over, and it was a kind of 5 years ago awakening. Do you have a 5G telephone, or do you have 5G information? Something that has been called 5G. You've got a German one. You don't count. One person. It's the end of 2020. The first auction in Poland was announced 2 years ago. This is the result of what we are talking about. This is a conflict situation that continues. China's here. Not many things that have been tackled between states, and we've got Huawei situation. Americans realized that they lost the baton of leadership. It was not the States, but Europe was creating telecoms, the allies. And Chinese have got a new impact on how the world operates. They need to be counteracted. Trump thinks, how do we do that? They depend on us, but some other places. For Huawei to produce 5G switchboard, they need to have processors, and they have to sell telephones in order to have money, to have technology boosting money. So where can we kick that back? Trump's people decided that it would be nice to have operation to exclude Huawei from the market by exerting pressure on allies, and on the other hand, to make it go Xing by other things, like removing Android from Huawei phones, because Trump realized that Android-based Huawei system, which has no access to Google ecosystem. So it means that you have no apps available. So all the apps that you're using now, well, it was a shortcut from me, but you know what I mean. So it was a hub, technological position of the states, and creating Android and Google. They designed chips. They say who can produce, who cannot produce chips, resulted in the fact that consumers, Huawei, lost access to consumers' platforms, and Huawei lost access to all processors of the world because all of them are state designed. So Huawei is head down first in telephone markets. To finish off my speech, because we can speak much about it, it's happening in front of our eyes. Something that was neutral. These fields were neutral. Politically, nobody was tackling it. And the states can see that other countries are looking for other kinds of impact. And they react in two ways. They try to harm other people. They create a kind of capsule around them, like States and Europe, how to tackle this technological upper hand situation, and they try to be independent from China. The Chinese are trying to detach from the global system, because Huawei, crown jewel, got a hit. It's heading head first down because it has received a hit. So let's separate. Let's do it on our own. Let's not be dependent on the rest of the world. And everybody's doing that. The last word. Europe is doing that. UE strategic autonomy is the thing. What to do if the Chinese cut off that? Americans think the same way. Is it a Cold War? But this is a kind of war. What kind of impact will it have on us, consumers? The China are introducing the regulation hurricane. The states are trying to strengthen their own technological sector, defending themselves against other sectors. Will we experience that? Will we feel it, us, the consumers? It impacts us a lot. It is not only nuclear weapons that they get, like in the 60s. It's a very difficult and interesting question, but there is no answer to that. So many factors. We'll have to sit here for 2 months working on the issue. We might have developed something. From my perspective, we've got a problem, us being the European Union, because we are not the global development leader. Of course, in the European Union, there are companies like in Germany that are called hidden champions. So these are the companies that produce exceptional technologies. They are world leaders and they've got some kind of turnover, few hundred million euros. I'm unable to quote the facts and figures at the moment, but there are companies like these. And there is something that may interest you, some kind of anecdote. Like 3 weeks ago, Boym Institute carried out research projects with German partners and visited 3 cities in Poland. We had a number of meetings, like in Germany. Quite a few interesting visits, and we talked to Duisburg mayor. It's called a Chinese city. It's a part of the Silk Route, but the data does not confirm it. In the course of discussion, there was this saying, this notion. This German well-being is based on decisions that were made dozens of years ago. They've got Volkswagen, strong industry, and the strong industry seems to be obsolete because cars go electric, combustion cars, we don't know how long we are going to use them on. So the Germans are thinking everything's switching to China as far as new technologies are concerned. So what will next generations be making their living on? This may not be a welfare society as we know it today. It was interesting because we heard it from the Germans, who's got one of the strongest, if not the strongest economy in the European Union. So this is something that should be thinking about. Being ourselves consumers who live in the European Union, we should spare a thought on our choices. This is not only a question of what is most comfortable for me. In a sense, this is a civilization-focused choice, whether I will use Huawei telephone and boost the development of these technologies. And if we have 5G from China, doesn't it mean that for years we will be the subject to them imposing services, so money will be going to a Chinese company and to China itself. So this is civilizational related choice. This is the problem that we are facing, which are very well defined by Western states. We speak too little. What do we speak about Poland's internal policy? You can open up daily newspapers and you'll find too little information on strategic choices that we're facing. Let me refer to my intervention that I had a moment ago. The decisions that are being made at the moment are kind of political emotion-based decisions, so to say, because the auction that we haven't had and for the time being, so we don't have 5G as the result. The result to scrape this was a political one. It was a geopolitical one. The auction was scraped 18 months ago, and the amendment on the Cybersecurity Act is being processed at the moment, which directly or indirectly blocks Huawei. Nobody's going to say it expresses verbis, but this is what you can read between the lines. I want to ask you, if we don't have this, if we try to find bearings in the situations, how are we coping? Are we able to work out the strategic objectives, or is it a kind of, waving flag? So we adjust to the direction of the wind. Trump, let's play with him. Biden, not so much do we want to be an ally. And we are blocked. We don't know whether we have it or not.
Well, the answer to the question is very complex because we have a number of processes and plots to be combined to reach an assessment I don't believe we could let off in our pro-American orientation if we mean how we look at the technological competitions. We will see what comes out of it, but you will know that when the Americans started the diplomatic offensive against Huawei, against including Chinese entities to national plans of building 5G networks, Poland was enthusiastic. Plenty of declarations. When last year the Department of State expanded the pure network expansion by excluding Chinese entities from 5G, the Mateusz Morawiecki's speech in that topic that was concordant with American policy was published on the U.S. Department of State's website. What is fundamental and may be changed that Poland so far hasn't been much interested in building the European strategic autonomy. This is a concept that started in security and defense. After 2016, it evolved to each sector, political sector, or public policies, where we can find certain dependence, strategic dependence of Europe on external entities, all on global trends. As a result of the building of European strategic autonomy, mostly promoted by France and Germany, Europe is waking to being aware that it needs to invest into emerging and disruptive technologies. That's a list of 20-something technologies that will have fundamental importance and influence upon the shaping of the balance of powers in the world. That involves AI, 5G, quantum ICT. Why Europe is doing that, we can understand. Why Poland should be involved more. Simple calculation of the effect of scale. When acting in a global technological race that demands huge money, possession of extensive technological base. We don't even know if Europe has it as such. Poland certainly doesn't. We must be in the synergy and follow and gain from the benefit of scale. If the Germans, for instance, are good at building radar technologies, we are good at something else. The French are good in the computational cloud, etc., etc. So it makes true sense to build a joint project and to build joint technical infrastructure that will allow us in the future to challenge China and the US, of course, not in the terms of war, but shape our own technological development in the way we find appropriate. In Poland, last week we saw the opening of the Polish hub of DIAX initiative, that's a cloud structure built by 27 member states. Poland joined the initiative. Was started 2 years ago. It shows maybe a growing interest from the decision makers also in the European initiatives. Which way that shall go, we can't say. I believe we will not decide to opt out from the American initiative. Getting back to the concept of digital Cold War, the Americans 2-3 years ago, when finding Huawei on 5G, they presented cautious strive to the global decoupling. That is the global termination of chains of values that bind allied countries' economies with China, so that those chains of value pass by China, so that reduce the dependence areas in the manufacturing sector in China. I don't think we could opt out quickly. We may look for alternatives, but I believe we will stay in the pro-US team long. 5 minutes or even less. Any questions from the audience? Could we ask for the microphone, please? Thank you, Tomasz Kamiński, University of Łódź. Michał Rekowski, aren't you exaggerating saying that about full control of state over technologies? Technologies are developed by private companies. And as long as China example is concerned, well, we have that control. It's remarkable, if not full. Then in the case of the US or Europe, the states may try to influence private companies that develop such technologies and own them, but they cannot control them fully. So building the strategic autonomy in the case of the West is far more complex. I would even put a question mark whether it is possible at all due to the lack of control. I believe we are not going to nationalize tech companies. They will never allow to that. Good question. So let me differentiate. I spoke of a trend that states in the world are trying to rebuild their digital sovereignty. It's understood differently in China, US, and the EU. The Chinese concept strongly stresses the control of the state over cyberspace traffic and technical development. We've seen it since 1990s, together with the growth of the Great Firewall, the Golden Shields project. That's a model we should name state-centric, to avoid stronger words, so that the state wants to control. In the EU, the concept of digital sovereignty originates from the French policy, and basically it means a more cautious process of controlling technological revolution. The difference between the China and Europe is that Chinese concept believes that the state should be the dominating entity to control the technological process, and we see that in the diplomatic offensive on the UN commissions in charge of that issues. The Wujing Internet Forum has the same purpose. In Europe, this is a process that needs to allow stakeholders from all the sides. So we have a dialogue between state members, supranational institutions, and the civic society, and that's how it is going to be shaped. So digital sovereignty in Europe does not want to take control of big techs, but its implementation. But digital sovereignty means we create legal landscape to create such rules for operating that are not invasive for the European society in terms of privacy. As we could see that with GDPR last year, the Commission announced the Democratic Action Plan that is supposed to regulate the influence operations on the internet platforms. Then the digital strategic autonomy is something different. As Kuba said, it aims at two things: to be resilient to dependence, not being independent. You can't do that, but you should be resilient to dependencies resulting from the global economic structure, like in semiconductors, for instance, access to medical resources, as it was the basic problem in case of the pandemics. And secondly, it is supposed to provide the EU and Europe in technical capacities to implement its interest in the technological field. So that's investment in R&D and quantum IT. We need to be ready for the moment when a state gains quantum supremacy, and if with computational capacity will be able to crack down security systems. We have this mark. Please come to an end. Just very last one question. I wanted to expand that question and ask how far great corporations that are international are subjects in this geopolitical games, and they are treated by entities, not by the states, but by themselves as well. They enter China, they negotiate terms of the game on their own, bypassing the US, the EU, and what it's like from the perspective of you as experts. I believe that changes the conditions the states want to impose, and the perspective of those players, big corporations, is international. We mustn't hide that. We may speak that Facebook or Google is American, but they are international, with international owners.
Króciutko musimy już
Ja się,
odpowiadać.
przepraszam, wepnę, ale chciałem jeszcze...
With the first question, answering your question, I'd like to provide you with an example of American fight against the Huawei Corporation. It's not the Chinese reaction or the threat of escalation of conflict with China stopped Trump, and it took 3 years. The decision to do so was quick. The following 2 years were slow negotiations with American corporations with threat and asking. Semiconductors are a good example, like Intel or companies that supplied Chinese, Huawei, that the key opponent of Trump in fighting China, China didn't care for it. He had to fight his own American corporations by various threats, subsidies, etc. He succeeded. What did the companies do? He said no to Trump, because Intel can send its semiconductors from Costa Rica. Only the most serious arms Trump took against those companies, like sanctions, succeeded. From the point of view of the West, fighting own corporation is more difficult than fighting China. Just to finish, I believe I can quickly answer the very last question. Let me, to prove the power of big techs in that great situation, I can mention that in parallel we have accused activities regarding the regulation of those companies, and they are not justified by Cambridge Analytica, for instance, that all is interlocked. The time correlation matters. Semiconductors, we didn't have time to talk about them as much as we wanted, so I'll write about it and invite you to read my text in a couple of days. Thank you very much. Thank you for participation in the discussion. And join other panels today. In the evening you will have one that would sort of continue our discussion with true stars on the panel. Thank you.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise.
Now boarding flight 1215.
You may now kiss the bride.
Work is different now. We're commuting less, virtually meeting more. Separating work life and life can feel challenging. It's easy to forget that to thrive at work, we need to take care of ourselves. Microsoft Viva Insights offers new experiences to balance productivity and well-being. Personal insights help you stay at your best and most productive. Add structure to your remote workday by opting for a virtual commute, carving out time to have a productive start in the morning and mindfully disconnect in the evening. Protect time before your calendar fills up for focused work, coaching, and learning. Take regular mental breaks with Headspace, tapping into dedicated moments of mindfulness. Use emotional check-ins to tune into your day-to-day mindset and well-being. Strengthen team bonds with Stay Connected experiences that prompt you to praise collaborators, schedule one-on-ones, and follow up on pending commitments and outstanding tasks. Insights for managers and leaders offer windows into how work happens and the impact on employee well-being. Identify where teams may be isolated and take action to break down silos. Quickly discover opportunities to prevent burnout, promote coaching and development, and boost engagement. You and your team's well-being is important, especially in times of change. Taking care of one another allows you to thrive and your organization to build resilience. Experience how new well-being insights in Viva can help.
Liberté Talks to co ważne. Seria Liberté Talks realizowana jest dzięki wsparciu Google oraz Państwa darowizną. Na podcast z klimatem zaprasza Jakub Wiech.